Hi, my name is Harold Saive. You can find me on Twitter under that name. My website is chemtrailsplanet.net. I have a Facebook page called Chemtrails Planet and a YouTube channel called Chemtrails Planet. I'm a 70-year-old retired hospital administrator in the field of invasive cardiovascular services and reside in Gainesville, Florida. I studied electronics during the era of vacuum tubes, just as solid-state transistors were in development. My medical training is courtesy of the United States Air Force during the Vietnam War of Adventure, the dark days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs, and another murder of a U.S. president. I hold an amateur radio license and have used my station to bounce electromagnetic radio waves off the ionosphere to communicate long distances. I attained a private pilot license in 1978 when persistent jet trails were rare to unheard of and skies were mostly blue. I served as a volunteer ham radio communicator at the National Hurricane Center, W4EHW, during the 1990s, where conversations with National Hurricane Center forecasters gave me my first clues about how aerosols were being used to modify tropical cyclones. I'd like to begin with a discussion of chemtrails and geoengineering. Chemtrails is not an internet rumor. Chemtrails was invented and published by the Department of Defense in 1990 as the title to a chemistry manual for future Air Force pilots. The complete 200-page microfiche film was ordered through my public library and reconstructed into PDF format for free download on my website, chemtrailsplanet.net. The word chemtrails is listed in the Oxford Dictionary to describe unusual jet contrail emissions. The word chemtrails is described in House Resolution H.R. 2977 as an exotic weapon. So, contrary to disinformation, the term chemtrails is not the whimsy of so-called conspiracy theorists. Chemtrails was invented by the Department of Defense and paid for by the American taxpayer. It's more than a coincidence that the term chemtrails leaked from military use into civilian language to describe unusual emissions from jet aircraft. During the mid-1990s, activists were making preliminary guesses concerning the purpose of chemtrails and why we are all being sprayed. In 2014, we have more information about motives for chemtrails that have caused some of us to revise these older working theories. As information continues to unfold, it becomes clear that we are dealing with two different geoengineering programs. First, chemtrails is the weaponized version of geoengineering, most aggressively underway since the mid-1990s. These aerosols are sprayed in the troposphere below 40,000 feet. The second program has been made public by geoengineer David Keith as a method to prevent the extreme effects of global warming. These aerosols of sulfuric acid are intended to be sprayed at 70 to 90,000 feet in the stratosphere, where current jet aircraft cannot even fly, especially with a payload of aerosols. David Keith's version of geoengineering agrees with the Royal Society as, quote, the deliberate large-scale manipulation of the planetary environment to counteract anthropogenic climate change, unquote. We can safely assert that chemtrails are not sprayed to counteract global warming at all. Defined as an exotic weapon in H.R. 2977, the evidence points to chemtrails as directly involved in weaponizing and warming the weather, especially when used in conjunction with powerful electromagnetic devices. HAARP, NEXRAD phased radar, and satellite microwave beams are frequently mentioned. In order to communicate with Congress, policymakers, and officials, we must articulate a rational case based on mutually accepted definitions of key language. Today, chemtrails are more and more perceived as a deliberate cause of climate change and global warming, a position confirmed by climate scientists themselves in the IPCC Special Report on Aviation and Global Atmosphere published in 1999. On page 17 it says, quote, contrails tend to warm the Earth's surface similar to thin, high clouds, unquote. In this context, we can safely speak publicly about contrails and cirrus clouds as contributing to global warming. When the discussion moves to the what-ifs of artificial contrails and artificial cirrus clouds, we are protected from being tossed out as conspiracy theorists by the conclusion in the IPCC special report. If our goal is to watch geoengineering in order to stop chemtrails, we must be willing to differentiate between the covert chemtrails version and the publicly acknowledged sulfuric acid version promoted by David Keith. That remains in the planning stage. To summarize my position, number one, the text of H.R. 2977 is explicit that chemtrails is an exotic weapon and never referred to as geoengineering to mitigate global warming by reflecting sunlight back into space. 2. Chemtrails cannot be correctly called stratospheric aerosol geoengineering at 70 to 90,000 feet when the jets are spraying the aerosols 7 miles lower in the troposphere below 40,000 feet. Number 3. There is no published research to establish effective solar radiation management when aerosols are injected into the troposphere below 40,000 feet to mimic cirrus clouds or, quote, thin, high clouds, unquote, as mentioned in the IPCC report. Furthermore, chemtrails examined by a telescopic lens are revealed in a variety of different shades and hues, from silver to a dirty brown, consistent with the finding that chemtrails have the effect of warming surface temperatures. When we accept that contrails, chemtrails, and artificial clouds are warming surface temperatures, we can no longer claim that chemtrails is proof they're already doing it or already mitigating global warming. When we accept that there are two different geoengineering programs to be considered, we can no longer claim that geoengineering with chemtrails is proof that attempts to cool the climate is already happening. The confusion about the definition and use of the term geoengineering is a serious language obstacle and prevents the important realization that two geoengineering programs are now envisioned to manipulate planetary climate. Geoengineers like David Keith will spray sulfuric acid high in the stratosphere to prevent weapons-grade geoengineering with chemtrails from warming the climate. If the planet is already in danger from chemtrails, what will be the consequence when two geoengineering operations compete with each other in a simultaneous spiral of climate chaos? Next, I'd like to expand on what I call the climate industrial complex, the global warming matrix of mass deceit. Warming the Arctic with large-scale geoengineering projects has been the vision of industrialists since 1877, 7 years after Standard Oil was incorporated to become the largest refiner in the world until 1911. Two historic documents reveal the long history of climate geoengineering, where media propaganda literally went from hot to cold after World War II. While researching the deep history of global warming, I was astounded to learn that many proposals to warm the climate and melt Arctic ice have been openly planned from 1877 to 1963. Like the neuralizer from the Men in Black, the long history of elaborate plans to artificially warm the climate has been erased from cultural and institutional memory. President Kennedy's address to the National Academy of Sciences on October 22 of 1963, 1 month before he was murdered, talked about the need to control the climate. Kennedy's vision was a public program of weather modification to be administered by multiple federal agencies with the goal of protecting the nation against drought, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, and other forms of destructive weather. Originally organized under NASA in 1966, the weather modification program was quickly hijacked by the U.S. military into a weapons program where it was taken underground as top secret in the interests of national security. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, weather manipulation entered the domain of Wall Street, the Chicago Climate Exchange, and commodities futures, as we saw revealed in the documentary Why in the World Are They Spraying? Needless to say, The long history of proposals to warm the Arctic and melt Arctic ice stand in sharp contrast to the current hysterical version of climate change as fear porn for political gain by the architects of the New World Order. The first document reveals NASA's role in organizing a multi-agency National Weather Modification Program in 1966, 3 years after Kennedy's address to the National Academy of Sciences. The second document is a critique of the National Weather Modification Program based on its transition to a secret military operation, taking with it many federal agencies that are now sworn to secrecy under pretense of national security. The first title, Present and Future Plans of Federal Agencies in Weather Climate Modification. This document from 1966 reveals the plan to organize a network of government agencies in perpetual and secret collaboration with each other and the military to modify the global climate. Created by the elitist National Academy of Sciences, decades of an interagency culture of secrecy explains why the issue of artificial jet contrails is a taboo topic to be denigrated to the status of conspiracy theory by complicit career bureaucrats at every opportunity. This is why your local TV meteorologist will never talk about unusual contrails. The second title, The Evolution of a Weather Modification R&D Program into a Military Weapons System. This document appears on the website of the Federation of American Scientists as a critique of the U.S. Weather Modification Program that the authors characterize as hijacked by the military. These documents are essential reading if we want to move forward with a plan to stop chemtrails, the exotic weapon. Let's take a brief overview of the history of global warming. It was Jules Verne who wrote about geoengineering to warm Earth's climate in 1889. In a sequel to From Earth to the Moon, called The Purchase of the North Pole, Verne writes that the Baltimore Gun Club purchased large tracts of the Arctic, then used the famous cannon from the Earth to the Moon to tilt the Earth's axis. The goal was to establish a tropical paradise as a profitable tourist attraction at the North Pole while improving the entire global climate. Verne was probably inspired by Harvard geologist Nathaniel Shaler, who proposed diverting warm Arctic water through the Bering Straits to raise temperatures in the polar region by 30 degrees. The last in a long line of proposals to produce artificial global warming came from respected meteorologist Harry Wexler in 1962. Wexler was an MIT graduate and PhD in meteorology. He'd been researching the link connecting chlorine and bromine compounds to the destruction of the stratospheric ozone layer, but died of a sudden heart attack while on vacation in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Wexler had already accepted an invitation to deliver a lecture entitled The Climate of Earth and Its Modifications at the University of Maryland Space Research and Technology Institute. Wexler's was the last published global warming proposal before carbon dioxide was promoted as fear porn. Coincidentally, Wexler's proposals were made at the same time the National Academy of Sciences was working to create a national weather modification program, a direction in which the military had already embarked in 1958 when they announced success with controlling the weather using an ionospheric heater similar to the one eventually installed at HAARP in Gakona, Alaska. Here are the amazing global warming initiatives proposed by Wexler. Number 1. To increase the global temperature of the Earth by 1.7 degrees Celsius by injecting a cloud of ice crystals into the polar atmosphere by detonating 10 hydrogen bombs in the Arctic Ocean. Number 2. Raise the temperatures by 1.2 degrees Celsius by launching a ring of dust particles into equatorial orbit, a modification of an earlier Russian proposal to warm the Arctic. Number 3. To destroy the ozone layer and hence increase abruptly the surface temperature of the Earth by spraying several 100,000 tons of chlorine and bromine into the stratosphere. It's also significant that nuclear detonations in the Arctic region over a period of 50 years from 1955 to 1990 include a total of 88 atmospheric, 29 underground, and 3 underwater explosive bombs. Nuclear bombs. By most media accounts, the public has been enthusiastic about geoengineering plans to warm the climate. The following are quotes from a 2005 Village Voice article. Quote, "Hey, remember when the climate change was a swell idea? Coconuts were in the offing. Imaginations ran wild, and the Washington Post envisioned Manhattan becoming a tropical paradise. People would be gathering oranges off the trees in Central Park, or picking coconuts from palms along the Battery, hunting crocodiles off the Statue of Liberty," unquote. The prospects sounded so splendid to New Yorkers that Senator William Calder tried to get $100,000 appropriated for a study of the idea in the 1920s. Now, I'm going to stop here, but I encourage you to read this article and do your own thinking. Even though I have a firm opinion about this issue, I don't claim to be correct about every detail, so we welcome anyone with passion for the truth to join the discussion. As I see it, global warming is a shell game of mass deception. It cannot be dismissed that the history of proposals to warm the climate goes back to the days of Standard Oil in the 1870s. This fact cannot be ignored, especially when most of the remaining oil resources are known to exist in the Arctic. I'm convinced that climate modification with chemtrails and covert electromagnetic technologies does not add up to mitigation for man-made global warming and greenhouse gases. Instead, it appears the matrix of deceit is driven by big oil, the bankers who fund them, and the related commodities investment opportunities created within the climate industrial complex.